So once again, welcome everyone to this program. And the program starts now. So like we said, this program is all about community networks, what we need to know about the internet of the people, by the people, and for the people. Like we already know, the internet is changing our world, and it can empower us, it can connect us, and facilitate information exchange across borders. Also, it can open up a world of opportunities. Internet access has been recognized by the United Nations as an enabler of fundamental human rights, like the right to free expression, education, and learning, and earning a living. With half of the world's population unconnected, it's urgent that we shape a tomorrow that benefits everyone. Thus, the reason to build a digital future that puts people first. Closing the digital divide is critical, and community networks offer a solution. These do-it-yourself networks built by the people and for the people. And for our program today, we have lined up panelists for today, which includes Michuki, who is also a keynote speaker. We have Seun, Ojedeji, Josephine, Miliza, Amire, Adewale, Adedokun, and Carlos Moreno. And like we already know, this webinar is hosted by the Internet Society of Nigeria Chapter. So our agenda for today, we have the opening remarks, and of course the presentation on community networks by Michuki. We will have a moderated panel session that will be anchored by myself, Bukola, Oronti, and Dewole, Ajao. Also, there will be a session for remarks by participants, responses from the panel, and announcements. And of course, as usual, our discussion continues on Telegram and ISOC Nigeria. So right now, I move to the first point on the agenda, which is the opening remarks. Dewole, Ajao, your help, please.
Thank you very much, Bukola. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for making it on time to this month's webinar on community networking, as Bukola has introduced. I'm happy to note that there are several experts in the house. I wouldn't take too much of our time. Maybe I'll just describe the format that we would use, which is the presentation by Michuki first of all, and then we'll go into tapping the brains of our panelists that we have in the house. Primarily as described earlier, at the Internet Society, we think that community networks are a very good way to bridge the gap to a lot of communities that are unserved or underserved, primarily because commercial operators think that there's not much value in those people there, either because they can't afford to pay their subscription plans or because they don't think the internet access is that important. And we know, because we've enjoyed internet connectivity, we've enjoyed it for our education, we've enjoyed it for business, we've enjoyed it for keeping in touch with our families. We know that it is good to be connected to the internet. So the task on us now is to, one, educate the people in places where they don't have adequate access to the internet. Two, try to influence policymakers so that access to these places can be made easier. And then three, encourage the growth, the technical things that you need to do for the communities to start to build their own networks and get access to the internet from there. So I will hand over to Michuki. Michuki is from the Internet Society Africa Bureau, and he's one of the chiefs when it comes to internet exchange points, community networks, and all of that. So he'll give us a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dewole. I had a set of slides, and thank you to the ISOC team for the invitation and this opportunity. I will try and stay within my timeline. And hopefully we'll have some room for Q&A after. So I don't know who's queuing the slides. Or should I share them from my side?
One moment while I confirm that, please. Michuki, I think you can go ahead and share from your side if the Secretariat share is not coming up.
Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
What you have is your own side, Michuki.
Oh, you have my own side. Okay.
Yes, with your notes.
Okay. And is that better now?
Yes.
Yes, now we see the presentation.
It's clear now.
All right. Thanks. Okay, so thanks again. Before I start talking about community networks, I just want to go through some set of data that will help put this into context. One of the things that's very clear, if you look at the last statistics that were available between 2017, 2018, is that about 45% of the world is still not connected. And that is largely as a result of the fact that affordable access is still, an issue for many of the people who are in rural, remote areas. And if you look at the statistics as at December 31st, 2017, you'll have a better understanding as to why. One of that is the fact that Africa still lags behind with the rest of the world when it comes to connectivity. And one thing I find very interesting about this particular data set is that it says 35% of Africa or internet penetration is at about 35% of the population. And then if you compare to a lot of the data that you have with the UN and various organizations, it shows that around 35% or 37% of the African population live in urban centers, and about 65% live in rural areas. So if you compare that data set, the population on urban centers also is about, goes back to about 2014, you will see that if you compare that and match with the penetration, it almost feels like internet access in Africa is largely available in urban centers and not in rural areas, looking at that penetration rate. And so it goes to show that connecting the rest of Africa outside of the urban areas is still an issue. And this is something that we need to tackle. And when you look at why that is a challenge, there are a couple of reasons. First and foremost, that Africa itself is huge. And when you go and look at some of these business models that are in use, for instance, if you look at the a study that was produced by or a survey that was produced by GSMA in 2017, it showed that they needed a mobile operator needed about 3,000 active users to be able to deploy a 3G base station. And basically using that particular model, it meant that connecting the next billion of users, of which majority of them will be coming from Africa, basically it means they will only be able to accomplish that right between 2025 and beyond. So it means that many people will have to wait much longer to be able to get connected. So there's a real need to be able to look at alternative models to be able to reduce that time as to when people will actually have access to the internet and be able to benefit from it. So there are a couple of things that we need to look at, and some of those are reasons as to why connecting the unconnected, or if you think about Africa from that point of view, is the 65%. What does it mean? Do we need to look at the policies? Are those policies really encouraging to get access or to provide access, affordable access to people, to that 65% of the demographic? Are we able to collaborate in deploying networks? Are we supporting the people in those areas to actually get the access that they need and also the technical know-how to be able to manage those networks? So those are some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. So going into community networks, and what Bukola said at the beginning is that, there are networks for the people, by the people. Basically, there's a broad definition that falls under community networks, which basically goes as networks or telecommunications infrastructure deployed and operated by citizens to meet their own communication needs. And that tends to really address some of the issues that each and every community would be facing. So let me take this into a slightly different context. I live in Kenya. I would like to say I live in Nairobi, but actually live outside of Nairobi in the next county. And it's in a sort of rural area because we don't have government water. We do have roads, but we don't have water, piped water. So what has happened is that the community has come together and formed up a water project group that went and sought funding, drilled a borehole, put up tanks, got a pump to get water from the borehole, and started distributing the water. And to get water, you join as a member, you pay a certain amount upfront, and then you pay for some pipes, and they bring in the water to your house, and you put in a meter, and at the end of every month, you pay based on your consumption in cubic meters. So it's a really structured system that exists in this area to solve a critical issue with respect to water in this village or community that I live in. And every other household, all my neighbors get water from that or another. There are about 2 or 3 other similar projects. And why is this working better than the government, which has substantive resources? And, I mean, there's a water council that's supposed to be delivering the same for us, but really does a really poor job. We try to get water from them, and we used to only get water once a week. With these guys, we're able to get water at least 2 times a week, and it's scheduled. So you know the day the water is coming, so you have water collection points, and you collect, and that works. So it works well. And the reason it works is because it is owned, and it is a project by the community, owned by the community. They have structures to make sure that everybody gets water. Water gets distributed, and it's managed in a way that everybody is happy with it. So community networks sort of follow the same model in that it's the community that knows where the shoe pinches the most. And so they know how to build the service and the solution for the benefit of everyone. And using the water analogy in my home area, it's the same thing with community networks. They would build it in a way that works for them. So thinking about it from an African perspective, basically the community network is not simply a telecommunications infrastructure. that's deployed by citizens to meet their own communication needs, but it's also a tool to improve what the community is already doing in terms of their own growth, development, and contributing to the local ecosystem and enhancing the daily lives of those people staying in that community. And we were able to get this additional review to the definition of community networks based on a study that was done by Carlos a couple of years, 2 years ago, looking at community networks that are here in Africa. So the second part of my presentation, I really want to look at what does it take to build a community network.
Oh, she has not sent it to me.
Oh, sorry, I think there was someone speaking on. So what does it take? So there are 5 areas that you need to look at in building the community network. So first is understanding the community, the role of the functions of governance and ownership of the community network. I think there's someone who needs to mute themselves, please. And then there is the telecommunications network infrastructure that is really the foundation and the core anchor piece of this community network. How to sustain and scale the operations, and the enabling policy and regulatory environment. So the first thing I wanted to talk about on the how to build a community network is understanding the community. For any community network to exist, there needs to be cohesion that exists in that community. If you go to a place where people are fighting, you're less likely to be able to bring those people together and build a community network. So you need to make sure that the community has some level of cohesion, they have some level of understanding in terms of doing similar projects or undertaking similar projects and have been successful at doing so. And also understanding the structures that exist within that community. And key to the success of this is basically understanding the spheres of influence with respect to the community, looking at the tribal authority, the religious leaders, and also the local government. Those are key influencing partners or parties that help anchor and lend their support to an initiative such as community network. And of course, all those parties or those 3 spheres of influence, if you will, need to be in support of a community network initiative for it to be successful. And through them is where you can be able to bring the stakeholders or the community to sit down and understand what the objectives are and how you can work together to accomplish the goal of the community network. The second and most important aspect is the ownership and governance. And this basically comes through the process of once the community has started to pay attention to this, to the initiative, is having a clear vision. And part of the important thing to understand is because most of the community networks are initiated by people who are from the community, have not been in the community for some time, and basically they're from the community, they've been staying, gone to an urban center, been exposed to the internet, and they would like to bring that back to their rural home. Alternatively, foreigners or not local to the community, and they think they've been exposed to the internet from where they come from, and they think this is something that will benefit the community. So they need to develop collaboration and build trust within the community through working through these 3 spheres of trust and leadership. That is the local authority, the local authority, the tribal leaders, and the religious leaders, to be able to bring that level of trust and basically ability to work together between the community to achieve this particular goal. And so this is an important step in the process of building a community network, and something that needs to be thought through. And it does take time, by the way, and also identifying who are the other critical stakeholders that need to be involved in the process. For instance, the schools, the hospitals, and so on. Then the other thing that it's very important once you've gone through those initial steps is to think about the telecommunications network. And in many cases, and this is, as I said earlier, the anchor point of the whole community networks initiative, is basically think of how to build the communication network using low costs and locally available equipment. In many cases, you want to use telecommunications gear that you can find locally. That means you're not having to wait. If there's a failure in one equipment, you don't have to wait for weeks and months for it to be imported from abroad, and so on. And involving the community in building the network is critical. That means that community needs to be trained. There's an aspect of training that needs to take place, and also using the community or involving the community in the actual building. We've seen places where, like the photo you see there, that is in Zimbabwe, where they were just the other month putting up their community network. And that's them, the members of the community being involved in putting the mast up. So overall, the objective here is to lower the cost of the infrastructure deployment and the maintenance of it. I would like to point you to a particular set of, particular webinar that we did last year, which looked at the community networks technical and resource planning, which would be helpful for you if you're thinking to build a community networks on some of the things you need to think about from the technical side of it. So it covers those 5 points: the network operation center, accessing the access network, the backhaul network, where to get internet transit and peering, and how to get IP address space. So it goes into a lot of detail, and you might find that useful. Then very quickly, I will go into sustainability and scalability. And many of the community networks that we've seen in Africa have been built through various sorts of funding mechanisms. Some have used seed funding, donation, crowdfunding, and so on. But this is important to think about at the beginning, because for the community network to be sustainable, and it means that it needs to have a revenue stream to be able to cover the cost of operations and maintenance, and also to address some of the other challenges that will come up. And so most community networks will offer the services or access to the network at a cost. And basically here there is room for the community network to be innovative about how they provide those services to their community. I'll also ask you to, and it's on my slides that can be shared later, there's a link there to another presentation or a webinar that was done last year that takes a deep dive into this issue of the community network sustainability and development. Finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the enabling policy and regulatory environment. We are seeing that there is a challenge to setting up community networks in Africa, and this is largely because there are some existing barriers to the deployment of community networks. We've just been going through this in Zimbabwe, and we've learned that while you can use Wi-Fi equipment, which is what most community networks do deploy at the initial phase, in Zimbabwe you are limited to your signal not going beyond 100 meters. So that means it almost restricts you to using that within an office or an office complex or a farm or just a very limited space, and you cannot use that to span across and distribute a wireless or build a wireless mesh network to serve an entire community. So that means there needs to be a review of the policy in Zimbabwe if the community networks, the community network in Zimbabwe, which we're working with called Murambinda Works, is going to be able to deploy and provide that kind of service in the rural area that it serves. So there are a couple of challenges here from a regulatory and policy point of view. The licensing and registration becomes an issue for community networks. Taxes can also be a huge issue, and this is something that is increasingly becoming a challenge. Financing, access to financing for community networks is difficult, and also access to the spectrum that they can use is also an issue. So this becomes an important point that needs to be addressed. So here, the goal will be to try and engage policymakers and regulators to help them see the benefits of creating that enabling environment for community networks to be able to exist and thrive in the telecommunication space. And this is with respect to connecting those in rural and underserved areas. So there's a lot that can be done, and I will leave because I only had about 15 minutes and I see I'm almost 4 minutes over time. I would like to conclude and say that there's a lot we can do to engage policymakers to find innovative solutions to some of the policy and regulatory challenges that exist or barriers that exist in the region that need to be streamlined or improved so that we can see more and more community networks coming into existence and enabling to bridge this gap where we have more people from Africa connected. So with that, I would like to conclude and take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michuki. And my first question, though there's a question in the chat room also, but my first question now is with the presentation and with the statistics you presented earlier, what exactly can we say on the average? Is the community networks in Africa, is it encouraging, or is there room for improvement right now compared to other parts of the world? And also the next question from the chat room, which I wanted to address briefly now, is how do we ensure safety? When we are talking about the community network, is the internet for the people, by the people. Since most of the people that are doing this work are not really professionals. So how is safety ensured? And also with the statistics, do we have an encouraging figure in terms of community networks in Africa right now? Thank you.
Thank you, Bukola, for those two initial questions. So I would say that we are at the starting point of the community networks movement, if I could call it that, the community networks movement in Africa. When Carlos worked with us to do the survey, we found that there were about 36 community networks, of which I think the data point runs away from my mind. I think only about 12 or so were active, and they were active by virtue of the fact that by definition of what the community networks is, they met that criteria. But they have challenges in that they have challenges with sustainability, they have challenges with regulation, and a lot of them are operating in what I would consider a gray area, and so on. So we are at the very beginning of this movement, and so there will be an opportunity. It presents an opportunity for us to be able to take this to the next level. And what does that mean? It means we need to see more community networks, because they will serve as models that others can emulate. They will also serve as models that help policymakers and regulators use as showcase or studies for improving the existing policy. Without setting up like what we are doing in Zimbabwe, the regulator was not ready to review the existing regulation towards opening up wireless networks that can be used to connect the unconnected. And so the process we started in Zimbabwe triggered an interest with the regulator to start reviewing their process. And actually last month there was a call for consultations from the public, to the public rather, to give input on how they can review the use of the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz band, with an objective of providing access to rural people in rural and remote areas or underserved communities for broadband access. So the work that needs to happen is for us to have more and more of these community networks and so that we can start that movement, which will really provide the opportunity for others to learn about the alternative ways to connect people in rural and underserved communities. On the second issue of safety, I'm not sure whether I fully understood your question, but do you mean that the people who are actually building and running these networks are not?
Yes, I think that's what the person had, that how do we ensure safety since most of the people involved are not professional in the field?
Well, so that's a very interesting question. I see that from Christian. So Christian, I like quoting my friend Carlos, and he has a very good analogy to this. If you go to the rural areas, do the houses in that rural area, did they have a structural engineer who helped design it and it was built as per the standards of the building codes? And the answer often is no. You have a local guy who knows how to build the houses, and they are built as per the community standards, if you could put it that way. And so one of the challenges we tend to face often enough is that we try to base building internet infrastructure using very high-end standards. Like if you look at the standards of building a mast, as per the regulatory standard, it's very high. And that means that the base station becomes very expensive. And as a result, the cost of, because that cost of building that base station has to be transferred to the end users, then the cost of access goes high. When you use building community networks using locally available materials, what you're trying to do is build a mesh network, which means you're trying to lower the cost of building this network using local technologies as opposed to imported very high standard types of technologies. And as a result, the cost of building this network is low, but it doesn't mean that you compromise the quality of the network. The network is built using internet standards, which makes it resilient. And we've seen this last year during the Community Network Summit in Eastern Cape. We had a major rainstorm, and because of the rainstorm, all the mobile base stations went offline. But the community networks in Eastern Cape, which is run by Zenzeleni, remained up and was giving us access throughout, but there was no mobile signal coverage. So these mobile base stations consume a lot of power. They're built to certain standards. But if you build a community network using, low-end radios which have low power demands, and using a solar panel and one battery, you'll be able to run for 3 days without having power issues, and so on. So the innovation here is using the technology that is affordable, resilient, and scalable, and at the same time making sure that the overall cost of building the network is maintained at a low cost, that you're not having to end up to push the cost of running the network or building that network to the end users, making it inaccessible to users.
Thank you very much, Michuki. So Dewole, are you on? You're up. Dewole?
Yes, thanks a lot, Michuki, for the great presentation and the insights in the short Q&A session. In a moment, I will switch to Josephine. Josephine, are you on the call?
Hello, yes.
Hi, Josephine. So maybe you can take on, I'm sure you have some thoughts based on conversation so far. We'd like to hear a little bit about your experience being a community network operator, in your experience in terms of getting the communities aware. Michuki talked about collaboration, the governance, and the ownership. Can you just share in a minute or two a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, okay. So for me, I really agree with the point on starting out from the bottom up in terms of involving the community. So which from our experience, Tunapandanet was not what we initially started. So just a bit of background on how we started. We started the project in, I think it was in 2016. And for us, we were just looking to do an open education intranet that now has grown and evolved into a community network over the years. So starting out, it was more on what as an organization. So we ran a training facility here in Kibera, and it was more on us as an organization seeing the challenge with regards to receiving so many applications, but only able to accommodate a few, to now sort of decentralizing learning to the whole community. But then with the pilots that we did not experience any success. And so we had to go back to a reflection mode, and we adopted methodology. So we call it like a human-centered design approach. So starting asking the question in terms of understanding the needs of the community and how we can be able to make an impact. So starting out, I remember one of our blessings is that we met Michuki, and we first identified the low-hanging fruits. So we wanted to do education, health, and businesses. And since we are already in the education scene and we already had existing partnerships, that is what we started to pilot with. So yes, getting champions within the community who are able to advocate for you, who are able to get more people involved, and also being able to identify and form a bit of partnerships. So they work in two ways. Either it can be even just people who, or organizations or institutions that are able to host the equipment and keep it safe, because from the onset, you might not have the budget to actually pay for rental space with the different community organizations. So yes, having the community ownership, I really admire what Zenzeleni has done, because when we went there, one of the testimonies was that they have never lost any equipment from theft. So that can only be as a result of really having that the community believes in the project and believes that this is a project that is bringing value to them. And so for us, that is what we are striving for, ensuring that you bring the community more and being able to segment and say the community is big, but who in the community can you target for starters?
All right, thanks a lot, Josephine. So if I were to, if I'm getting you correctly, one, the community should have a deep sense of ownership of the project. Two is that in deploying the community network and its services, it should be running or providing services that are already important to the people: health, education, communication. And so at the end of the day, you're doing something that aligns with the community, and the community helps it grow.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing those insights. We also have on the call here Bamidele Amire, and he's been building networks around Africa for a while. I just wanted to ask, just confirm, Dele, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, welcome and thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you so
I
much.
wanted to ask a little bit, just delving into the technical side a bit. I know that you've been building networks in maybe not non-commercial community networks, but in terrains that are very, very similar to what we see in the less urban areas. And I wanted to find out from you again, what do you think the key ingredients are for building and operating successfully in a rural area? And this is both on the infrastructure side and as well as the business models. Because what we want to do with community networks is set up networks that can be sustained, not networks that are constantly dependent on external grants or something. People should figure out how to operate these networks and make them successful. So I just wanted a few insights from ingredients that you think are necessary.
Thank you so much, Dewole. From my experience moving around, I realized that one critical factor there has always been the fact that making the community have a sense of ownership has been very critical, because no matter what you put there, if the community really don't see any use or advantage of it to them, you can be sure that vandalization is near, theft is near, and a whole lot of other issues. And in terms of deployment and sustainability, going for the cheapest that is available, talking about locally available things, in most cases, I really wouldn't want to say anything is really locally available there. But what you can take there and know that you need the barest minimum cost to sustain is what really flies around or makes things work in those places. What the locals can easily support when there are issues. So that those are the kind of things I've seen over time work in those places, and things that are visible to them.
Okay, thanks, Dele. So if I get you correctly, most of the hardware we use is imported anyway, but
Yes.
You're talking about local availability. That's how many minutes to how many hours will it take you to get a replacement for hardware you need to.
Exactly.
And then who are the skilled people within the community to take care of the infrastructure?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's putting that together. That means it's very important that you're not just deploying infrastructure and services, but you're making a concerted effort to train local hands in the management of the network infrastructure. Thanks a lot for those insights. Bukola, I'll hand over to you now. We still have a couple of panelists here, and I'm sure she has some questions to ask them so that we can take use of their expertise.
Thank you very much, Dewole. And thank you for the insight from Josephine and Amire. Now, my next question goes to Carlos. Carlos, are you there? Carlos Moreno?
Yes, yes, hello.
Oh, thank you very much. You're welcome. The question is, from your experience and research work across Africa, can you also, apart from the things Michuki had mentioned earlier and some of the panelists, what are the common factors that affect the growth and sustainability of community networks?
What are the common factors that affect the growth and sustainability of community?
Yes, yes.
Well, I would say that, well, thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this panel. I congratulate ISOC Nigeria for this initiative, because I think one of the elements that affect the growth of community networks is to having more people involved and interested. And actually, it's amazing to see that there are 56 participants in this webinar, and I believe some of them are not from Nigeria. So I think that's one of the factors that affect the most. That not that many people know or knew that you can actually set up your own telecommunications infrastructure if you needed to. But I also think that at the same time, because of the very same statistics that Michuki was presenting, the people who need or who would be interested in setting up this infrastructure are not in this webinar. And in this webinar, there are people who have already access to the internet, which might be not affordable, but still we have access to the internet. So finding ways of reaching out to the people who might need that access or are interested on that access, and how are we, how do we get to how do we get to them, I think it's critical. And there are some interesting projects in Latin America around creating radio episodes and pass them on. So the basic knowledge about this possibility is shared via radio, which reaches way farther. So I think the first factor is the people. Those of us who have some sort of resources, like all of us in this call, who have access to the internet, who have some knowledge, some interest, and also the people who might not be connected and but also has the need of connectivity. So the people, then the legal, the regulatory and policy framework. I think Michuki mentioned it already, but if everyone thinks, first of all, that only big operators can do this, right? And it takes quite a lot of effort to convince people otherwise. And again, this type of webinars go into that direction of trying to kind of let everyone know that community networks are possible. And as Michuki was saying, there is a growth of new community networks all over the continent, from the AFCHICS project to this project in Nigeria that you are already starting, to some other networks in Cameroon. I believe David is also here. I keep on hearing about more and more networks in the continent, people who actually take that risk. But the risk in the sense of entering a new space. But then if once you start doing something and you start thinking, well, is this legal? Is not legal? Am I, am I doing something right? Is the regulator or the government, especially in countries in Africa where sometimes legal issues can have very negative consequences in the lives of people, is this something that I really want to get involved in? So if there is no support from governments, if there is not a clear direction from the government saying, you can do this, you can build your own house, as Michuki was saying. You can build your own house. You can build your own garden. You can build your own water cooperative, as Michuki is saying. But people do not know, or they have issues around considering whether they could do it or not. That certainty from a policy direction, as well as a regulation that accompanies that and facilitates and enables that community networks are possible, I think is really critical, right? And then so regulation and policy frameworks the second. And yeah, I think from a sustainable perspective, I mean, those two things are critical. I mean, you need to get people involved who are interested in using those services. So if they go down, they are going to fix them. And you need to have a legal framework that ensures sustainability. We always talk about the investment and the certainty that the investors need to have in a given country and in a given economy before investing. How people are going to invest their time and their little savings in a community network if they don't have certainty if that's legal or not. So I think the legal frameworks are also affecting sustainability in many ways. And then I would say...
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, yeah, there are two other points, but I can continue on that later. Sorry, I extended a bit too long.
Okay, sorry. Another question for you. Because on the issue of privacy, also latency guarantee on community network, what do you have to say about that? You know, when we're using low-cost equipment and the like, and the community will not be taken advantage of in terms of their privacy, and also what guarantee do we have concerning latency on some of this equipment?
So, well, in terms of latency, that's a very technical question, and it really depends on many, many factors. But any one of you who have traveled to rural areas, well, latency is one of the parameters of quality of service. And if you have traveled into rural areas, in places where if you check the coverage map of mobile network operators, they say they have coverage, I'm sure you have experienced latency and you have experienced many other issues with quality of service. So I think that needs to be put into perspective in the sense of there might be latency issues regardless, and it depends on how the network is built. It's not something that applies to a particular way of operating the network, but applies to how the people that are involved are taking care of those type of issues and are taking the technical issues serious. And I think many community networks, because it's their way of communicating, they take technical issues way more serious than some of the bigger network operators who have their bread and butters in cities and not in rural areas, right? So that would be about latency and quality of service in general. And about privacy, it is true. I think there is more and more issues around the privacy in the internet and how our data is being mined and how our data is being used by larger companies and larger corporations, and how we need to be, all of us, aware of that. But that's, again, regardless of whether it's a community network or a local operator or a bigger operator. I think privacy is something that sits at the user level, whereas community networks sit more at the infrastructure level. And as users, we need to be all aware, but at the same time, community networks, being closer to that user, they have the possibility of explaining that, whereas MTN Nigeria doesn't particularly care about that privacy. It might even particularly benefit about it. So I guess by community networks being closer to the user, they might be closer to those type of problems because they experience it themselves. And therefore, most of the community networks in Africa, actually, they have trainings regarding privacy and regarding some sort of these threats, phishing and others that may happen through the internet.
Thank you, Carlos. Seun, Ojedeji, are you up? Are you there? Seun?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much.
Hello.
Now, my next question goes to you. Now, considering your role and experience as an open source advocate, the question is, in what area does open source comes into play or it becomes crucial when developing community networks?
Okay, that's a very important question, and it's actually one of the things I wanted to mention when Dewole was talking about the equipment or the tools that will be used in community networks. It has to be something that is easily accessible, something that the tools has to be one that can be easily managed and without the need for the community to manage or to worry about funding for licenses, so on and so forth. So that is where open source comes in. And I think that when building community networks, that aspect of looking for what is cheap and will work well at the same time can be achieved through open source. So there are several, there are a couple of routing platforms that runs on FOSS. There are a couple of database management that runs on FOSS. So these are some of the things that one should build a community network upon. I'm not saying that the closed source are not also useful, but in terms of sustainability, in terms of the ability to continue the project even when the initial takeoff is has elapsed, perhaps, one needs to think around open source solution. And it is by doing that that things can then continue. It is a myth in the past that people say open source is really difficult to understand, especially Linux operating system and so on. But things are much more easy to comprehend now. So it's much more close to the Windows side of things now in terms of graphical interfaces, and it's easy to grasp now compared to before. And there are various organizations that actually train based on open source. So like in Nigeria, we have the engineer who actually does capacity building, and they largely use open source tools to do those trainings. In our own environment as well, I'm sure we have one form of NOG or the other ISOC as well does some Linux Foundation trainings, which they use FreeBSD, Debian, and so on and so forth. So first, we need to build that capacity. We need to build the capacity of community networks on open source tools as much as possible and as much as feasible. I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seun. Now, another question for you is, already you are into FOSA Association, as in Free Software and Open Source Foundation for Africa, and also Open Source Foundation for Nigeria. What are the opportunities available with these communities that the community network can use in developing their networks? Like, okay, these sessions, they have this opportunity, they have this opportunity. How can communities take advantage of all these opportunities in developing their network?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I would talk about that, and I will also talk about some of the opportunities that also exist within another organization that I belong to. So for the first community that that you've mentioned, that's the OSFON, the FOSFA at Africa level, considering that the audience here is more than Nigeria. FOSFA has its membership base, and we do have a communication means, which is largely on the mailing list. There are various people who are subscribed on that list, and the fact that you have a community of people is already a major asset, which we most of the time we tend to ignore and we don't make use of. If people have challenge in setting up certain things, doing certain things using open source tools, once they share it on those platforms, you can be rest assured that somebody will be there to share his experience or share a solution, or even walk the person through on how to address whatever it is that the person is having as a challenge. So that network base is a major resource. Same applies to OSFON. That network base of people who are subscribed to the mailing list is actually a huge resource. Occasionally as well, both groups also try to organize trainings. In the past, we've organized trainings for OSFON, for instance, and for FOSFA as well. They run events like Idlelo, like ICT at Innovation Project, which was actually based largely on Linux training, Linux capacity, and forced business models, which actually allows train people how to use force to actually do business. The other organization which I wanted to mention as well is the AFNIC. AFNIC has a project called the FIRE program. That project actually allows people to subscribe, to apply for grants, to actually do things that are internet related. There are various categories of them, and things like this can be accessed, grants like this can be accessed for a community network to be set up. The one for 2019 will soon be announced, so I would just advise that people should watch out for it. I'm sure ISOC Nigeria, once they find it, the announcement, they will share it with the ISOC members. So those are some of the things. I know in the past that some group in Nigeria have actually applied to FIRE program from AFNIC, and things like that can actually be used to set up a community network. The other thing I wanted to mention is that one major advantage with community networks is also the security. I work in a university, and in my university we had a fiber to our annex campus. Of recent, we had a fiber cut, and what was the reason? Sabotage. Why sabotage? Looked like the villagers want some form of compensation from the fiber that is being laid. But one way or the other, the community don't feel that they had the ownership. They had the ownership of that infrastructure, and that is the problem. So once that sense of ownership is not there, because that may create some impression that oh, this is not for us. Of which the fiber itself, once it carries the network, it serves the university community, it serves other people who are within the community of the university, because one way or the other, they have kids there, they have businesses there, they are kind of one way or the other using the network. So we need to communicate that ownership, and I think it's if once the ownership is assured, then the level of vandalization of equipment perhaps will reduce significantly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seun. My next question goes to Adewale Adedokun. Adewale, please, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Thank you very much.
That's right.
Considering your role in NGNOG, that is Nigeria Network Operators Group, the question is, what education or training of local, in what way has NGNOG been involved in educating and training of local citizens concerning community networks? And the second question is, what other area can NGNOG contribute to developing community networks outside the training or education of local citizens? What other areas do you think NGNOG can contribute to developing community networks in rural areas and also in IDP camps? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. IDP camp. Okay. NGNOG definitely has been involved in training, but the training basically that we've been doing over the years is we've been training technical people on how to manage, deploy, design networks. So if we come down to community networks, I think there are quite a number of things that the NGNOG will be very happy to get involved in. You know, almost all the people that have spoken today are talking about policies. NGNOG has also tried to build capacity in policy development when it comes to communication networks management. There are quite a number of things that NGNOG will train people in. And, you know, one of the things we've tried to do over the years is try to build a community of trust. If we have a people that trust themselves, if we have people that we have trained in different communities and they've been able to attract people around them and people could trust them, when you want to build a network, especially in our rural areas in Nigeria, one of the very important things that we need to ensure we do is that communication network is not likely to be the first project that you want to do in the community. You want to ensure that you have someone in that community that over the years or over a period of time is being able to gather people around. You know, they have some other pressing needs. You have been able to gather people around to develop a kind of security for your people. You have been able to engage people, and may even be people in the community that you have been able to build a security network around the community to ensure that people will not come into the community, or people within the community will not cause trouble or will not break into people's homes. If people see someone in that community who has been able to do this, gather people around him, and they've been able to do this, maintain their roads, maintain security, like Michuki said, being able to build a kind of water network. When it comes to communication network, it's going to be much, much easier for such a fellow to do. So as far as NGNOG is concerned, we have quite a number of people. We have been able to build a community over a period of time, and this community spreads across Nigeria. There is hardly anywhere in the country that you will not be able to find someone who is being a part of the NGNOG community. So with this, if we look at this kind of trust a community of trust that we have built over a period of time. I can assure you that when it comes to now building community networks, NGNOG is well positioned to get people around who can easily talk to people, gather people around them to build such networks. Seun just gave a very typical example of problems people have when you are building networks. We've had such problems even around my own institution also before, trying to build a fiber network, one campus to another campus, we are trying to lay fiber, and you know, between the first campus and the second campus, you have about 15 kilometers. So you are cutting across several communities. One of the communities just decided to, you know, as we were trenching, they were closing up the trenches with concrete. And when we went to the community leaders to talk to them, they said, what are we benefiting from the university? So we need to be able to build, you know, that synergy between our institution and communities around us. The communities around them, there should be somebody that will be able to build the kind of synergy such that they will see that whatsoever you are doing is mutually beneficial to everybody. It's not just that you are trying to do something that they don't even feel your presence around. So as far as NGNOG is concerned, we can provide training for people to be able to deploy this network, for people to be able to manage this network in their own community. So if you get a few people in the community, you can train them to build the network, we can build the network together, we can train them in such a way that they will be able to see the network as themselves, as their own, and they can manage the network by themselves. It's only when they have problems that is beyond them that they would need to be able to speak to someone that is very close by, probably a member of the NGNOG community that will be able to help them to solve any problem that is beyond them. But we can take them from that level, from that zero level, to the point of being able to build and being able to manage, maintain the network by themselves. And probably even gather them together to be able to build some low-level policy amidst themselves in the community that will help them to be able to manage and sustain the network.
Hello, thank you very much. So if I get you right, already NGNOG has built a community of trust among all its participants in time. And two, you can still go ahead and still train people more on building community network, that is how to deploy it, to manage it, and also to train people of having a sense of ownership on community network, if I'm right?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Mr. Wale.
Yes,
Am I right on those points?
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Now, before I go into next, hello?
Go ahead, please. I'm
now,
listening.
briefly, I want Amire, can you please contribute briefly on what the previous panelists have discussed concerning vandalization of some of this equipment, because I'm sure you've experienced it at one point or the other, how you deploy an equipment and before you knew what's happening, it has been vandalized or sabotaged.
Thank you so much, Buki. One thing I've noticed. Thank you so much. When Seun mentioned the issue of fiber cuts between one campus and the other, and Dr. Wale has also said same thing now. One thing that readily comes to my mind is, why not, if you really want the community to have a sense of ownership, why not drop just one access point somewhere in town, off that your link, and then give them access just late in the night, and the community immediately buys into it. You don't have to do any special training for them to have a sense of ownership. That is what we're talking about when we say community networks. You have fiber passing through a whole community, and they just see the cable passing through. Nothing stop dropping by for them. I think we should just start from there, and you discover that, as far as I'm concerned, in Nigeria, for us to really take off with community network, considering every other limitations we have around, other issues here and there, one easy way of getting things started is for institutions in these places running fiber trade community and not dropping anything for them. There is no amount of talk you can give there. They still won't have any sense of ownership. But just drop one access point somewhere in town, probably in the community center or in the village center there for them. And then they will protect the fiber for you day and night, knowing fully well they are using the services of that connection. I think it's just one easy way that we should look at if and when the community network starts kicking off, maybe running off some of the institutions that have large bandwidth that are really not in use overnight. Thank you, Buki.
Thank you very much, Dele, for that insight. It's something that someone has talked about in the past, that when you're taking...
Thank you very much.
When you're taking crude oil from a place, it just makes sense to have some refined products hitting those areas so they don't vandalize. So I'll very quickly, we have questions piling up now. We've got about 20 minutes. Carlos, you had 2 more points for us. Can we quickly get those points, and then we'll start to take the questions from the chat, the ones that are not answered in the text chat. Maybe we can take them by have the panelists take some of them. Carlos?
Sure. I'm here. Dewole, thank you. No, well, one of the points is also around people, and I guess it's around some kind of a group of people that tend to be excluded from this conversation. We were very lucky to have Josephine, who is an expert on the topic and is one of the few women in the continent that are pushing. But I think it's going to be impossible to grow the community networks movement if we keep not including as many women as possible in these conversations, because they have quite a lot of things to share and to learn and to share and to show and to sustain this type of initiatives. At the end of the day, they sustain quite a lot of the foundations of the society, especially in rural areas in many places where I visited in Africa. So including more community network, more women in this type of panels and in general in community networks is something that we need to consider. And as we may know, they may have to attend trainings and to attend some of the other points that we have been mentioning so far. Well, they have other chores that they need to attend to at home, and how to include and facilitate their integration is something that we need to all be very aware of. And the other point, I think it was mentioned already by Michuki, but just to talk about it again, I think is the issue of using, someone mentioned it already as well now, about using access points, using technology that is accessible and available. And it should be, sometimes we try to use technology that is not available in the country, that it delays things. Let's try to use something that is available. Let's try to start small. Let's try to experiment and learn from something small. We don't need to over-engineer and over-complicate. And just by engaging with the technology and understanding what that means is something that community ownership, as someone was saying, training someone on community ownership, I think that's impossible. I think ownership comes with time and comes with experience and comes with doing it by yourself. See, the community ownership, community or individual, cannot be trained. Someone cannot train you to own something. You need to own it, and that's a very psychological fact. And the only way of owning it is doing it. And I think sometimes there is a bit of a discourse on going there and show them and train them, and as if people couldn't do it by themselves. So trusting and giving the opportunity for people who are living in quite more difficult circumstances than pretty much any of us in this call, to just learn something else by themselves and by their own circumstances will give much more opportunities for sustainability and for growth. Because at the end of the day, as I was saying, whoever is going to be sustaining that is not going to be the mobile network operators, it's not going to be the government, it's going to be the people who are using that. And there are some things that can be trained, and there are some things that need to be learned. And maybe we will also learn, I'm sure, it's not maybe, we will learn a lot of things from those people that are unconnected. And for the internet to be for everyone, and by everyone, it needs to consider those in rural areas as well, and everything that we need to learn from them. Thank you.
Right, thanks a lot, Carlos, for those insights. So we should make sure that the people, if we say it's for everyone by everyone, then we need more than just those of us that can afford to sit on the internet for 90 minutes on a Zoom call. We need to figure out a way to start getting the involvement of people from the grassroots, and then that will lead to the ownership. You can't train or teach ownership, as you said. Josephine, please, any thoughts based on the conversation so far?
Yeah, so for me, it's really trying to just see how we can support anyone who is interested in this space. I think there are case studies that have been written, but more on how can we be able to build this movement in Africa for it to be able to be strong. And it will be as a result of more and more community networks coming out from all over Africa. So my question is more to the audience or to the participants who are listening to the call, is that for those who are interested, like what sort of support would they want, or what sort of materials or what sort of resources would they want to be availed to them, so that we can start doing more documentation. I think that is a challenge that we have, is that although we have like very good stories or examples that people can be able to learn from, it's very limited because this knowledge is usually not documented or shared. So it's more like mine is a question and also ideas on how we can be able to build the movement in Africa for community network.
Right. Thank you very much, Josephine. Indeed, we don't have the answers. It's something that we need to grow and to share as we learn, and also get feedback from anybody who's listening to this recording or who's present here today. In a few minutes, I can see that Michuki is kindly answering some of the questions in the chat. Thank you very much. I'll just run through a few of them, see if there's any that I can, if there are any that I can answer on the fly like that, and then leave the rest for the panelists. Anybody who feels like grabbing any question there and providing answers, please, you're very welcome. Ufa Mode says, how do we make the community know how important the networks are for their development and sustainability? Most of the rural communities cannot afford devices that would work on these networks. An answer, I think, would be, as Josephine, Carlos, and others have pointed out earlier, is that we should find out what is most important to them. Easily, from our comfortable internet-connected places, we can think of healthcare and education as very important. And then in getting closer to these communities, we find out what is important. Not being able to afford devices, it might not necessarily start with it being on a personal basis, like each person having a device that can work on these networks. But if once we started identifying the key places or the key things that they need, that internet services will be able to help with, then we can start with a single device for those locations. Somebody was showing me a $20 equivalent mobile phone last week. It has dual SIM, Wi-Fi, 3G tethering, and all of that. So cost is relative. Christian Ahelzu asks, does a higher institution perfectly fit into the definition of community in this webinar? Thank you, Christian, for putting perfectly there. Since you put perfectly in that question, a higher institution does not perfectly fit in the definition of a community. We had the example Seun talked about earlier. A higher education institution tends to be on its own like a corporate entity, governed with its own governance structure and all of that. If the higher institution were to build a network that extended to their neighboring communities, where the communities had roles to play in the operation and management of that network, then we could say it would fit into the definition of community networks. But on the technical side, there's no lesson that you can't take away from there. Abdul Hakim is asking, have you encountered issues of conflicts between multiple regulators, as we've seen with NIDA and the NCC? So going into the regulatory and policy part of it, my take, and I'm happy to hear from the panelists on it, my take on this is that the regulators they're used to dealing with commercial entities. It's new to them, this concept of community networks. So we, within the Internet Society and other organizations, we have a lot of work to do to explain to the regulators that this is what I want to do, and this is how it does not fit into the present structure that you have. What can you do to help me? Or this is what I need you to do to help me or to help us on this so that we can move forward. There was a comment about taxes and policies and things like that. I think that and I think I learned this from, it was from Carlos talking about the Zenzeleni networks, I believe, last year. When your paperwork is good from the beginning and you treat it almost like it's a business, and you have a model for sustainability, and you can keep track of where your costs are, where your expenses are, it's easier for the regulators to see what you're doing and to see where you need their support in terms of tax breaks, in terms of license exemption and things like that. Lawrence Olawale Roberts asks about how do we deal with regulatory frameworks that insinuate we have to secure an operational license before setting up a base station. So we can, there are provisions for private networking. I think also at some point we would have to, give a little to get some. There are some basic licenses that we can get, that the community can get, that don't cost so much while seeking additional approval from the regulators. Interesting point, somebody had asked earlier about the public consultation held yesterday by the Nigerian Communications Commission on rural connectivity. To summarize, using TV white spaces. To summarize this, the regulator is looking at using TV white spaces. They've given a company a license to run trials. They are running trials somewhere in the country. And so we have even commercial network operators interested in these TV white spaces. My question to the regulator was, how can we, the academia and nonprofits, get access to this TV white spaces spectrum in case we want to run trials to do our own community networks, because it's something that's supposed to travel farther and then be near line of sight or non-line of sight. But the response back from the regulator was, go to the Broadcasting Commission to acquire the frequency, come to us to acquire the operating license. So basically right now they're not thinking about us as anything different from any other entity, which is the internet service providers. So we need to come back to them to say, oh, these are the concessions that we're looking for, and then we can take the conversation from that point. Sorry, I'm taking so much time. Gaius Ebere says, 3 key issues identified. It's taken for granted that resources for these network implementations are available. Reality is actually not so. It's difficult to convince our politicians and other people who have the resources to sponsor such projects to get involved, especially if they don't see the possibility of recouping their money within the shortest possible time. Yes. I think in that case, what would make sense, and that's what is currently happening, or is going to happen in Nigeria in the next couple of months. What will make sense is that they see an example of it running. We've not talked about it today, but in Zaria, the Internet Society Nigeria Chapter will be working with higher education institutions, research and education institutions within Zaria to see how we can put up a community network to interconnect the institutions there and then make it easier to supply upstream internet connectivity to that community. Again, using the kind of guidelines that have been mentioned from the beginning of this call, will not be jumping in to put in hardware and connect and say, there's your community network, but would be engaging the stakeholders with town halls and talking to people in their native languages to understand what's important to them, so that as they set up this entity to build, operate, and operate this community network, it is in line with what their needs are. Now, the point is, the plan is to share the growth, to share the stories of how this goes on with the regulators, with the grant-making organizations, the local grant-making organizations, so that they look at it and say, oh, we can actually use this to solve this problem, that problem, then we can replicate this in that other location and that other location and that other location without thinking about recouping money, since it's not a commercial venture per se. Implementation model, yes. One cap does not fit all. Every community is unique, and then together with the members of the community, we can decide what model they run, whether they want to use a subsidy-driven model or cost recovery, or they want to actually make profit and then put the profit back into expanding the network. Abdul Hakim has a couple of questions. Conflicts between regulators. So I will read them out, and if any of the panelists wants to give answers to them. Have you encountered conflicts between multiple regulators? How do you avoid being caught in the middle? And then this is tied into the need by the regulators to have overbearing control. Do you envisage any data privacy concerns? I think somebody has talked a little bit about data privacy, but he says especially related to data sovereignty, user metadata privacy. How does the community model compare, if at all, with initiatives like G-Station by Google? I think Seun tried to answer that there. Google's G-Station provides free internet access, and then they make their money back from adverts and stuff like that, I believe. But with the community model, the community provides the connectivity for those things that are most important to them, and then they decide how they want it to be sustained. And I think that partly answers how do we maintain infrastructure beyond any given support period. So it is based on the model that the community chooses, but we heavily will be providing we'll be building technical capacity within, educating the students and community members on how they can continue to run the networks. What kind of cyber-related norms, good practices, and things to avoid do you see evolving from community network initiatives? I think this is something that we will take this conversation on. Oops, sorry, it's taking us so long to run through the questions. So panelists, anybody want to chip anything in as answers to these questions? Michuki, Carlos, Josephine?
Maybe just one point to understand better the TV White Spaces engagement last year, and maybe as a point of action from everyone from Nigeria following up this conversation, is if they keep on treating everyone the same way they've been treating them, the problem is going to remain the same. So we need to advocate for different treatments to reach areas and to reach communities and sectors of the population that have not been reached before. So if they are trying to do the same, the result is going to end up being the same. So how do we articulate ourselves to convince the government otherwise?
So what you're saying, Carlos, is that we should work together within the rural areas to ask for specific assignments to non-profits for service within the rural areas, because what they are looking at doing is assigning to commercial entities for service within the rural areas.
Yeah, well, that has not worked in pretty much anywhere in Africa, because commercial entities don't have the interest on going to rural areas where there is no profit for them. That's why the proposition of the communities doing it themselves is kind of the way forward. Because if we can continue empowering commercial operators, but you can read the reports from the GSMA, which are the more commercial of them all, and their projections of growth are very limited, and it's limited because of their own models. It's not limited because of the regulation that are already favoring them.
Okay, I see now. So we just tell them, or we show them the stats saying that this hasn't worked. So why don't you think about setting some of it aside for community networks under favorable terms to run them, right?
Yes, I mean, exemptions, as you were saying, for non-profits or for rural deployments or cooperatives or for other type of SMMEs which are local in any way or form.
Okay, got you.
Just one other important thing to build onto this, and the understanding comes very clearly from the sustainability model of community networks. In the commercial model, your MTNs come into a community, you pay for the services, and the entire revenue generated leaves the community. The community is poorer for communicating. In a community network setting, only a small percentage will leave when they're buying interconnection with other service providers. Majority of that revenue generated stays within the community. So that means the community is richer for communicating as opposed to poorer. And that in itself has, a chain effect, basically meaning that they have more revenue, more money to be able to do other projects that are more community oriented in terms of development. So those are two things that you will need to complement and show how that is a win-win situation for bringing development without necessarily making the community poorer, or to maintain CEOs with big cars in the city, if you could put it more bluntly.
Thank you very much, Michuki, for that contribution. Sorry, we've run over the time by 2 minutes, but I'm hoping that the engagement is still making sense for most of us that are still online. Thank you for staying on for so long. I think Tata, in the absence of any other, if there's any contribution further contribution from any of the panelists to the discussion so far, we'll be happy to take it now. Our Tata has an update for us on the Zaria Community Network, I think. The Secretary General, our Tata.
Okay, good afternoon all. It has been a very, very fruitful discussion. Please, can I have my... Okay, okay, thank you very much. On the screen here, I'm supposed to discuss or tell us what we've done so far regarding the Zaria CL. Just a recap, in the last quarter of last year, we secured sponsorship. I mean, we secured this Beyond the Net grant to be able to construct a community network in Zaria. And ever since, we've been trying to put finishing touches in order to start implementing the project. And one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to set up what we call the town hall meeting. And we have here on the screen all the things that we need to do in order to bring the community network into actualization. We have here, the first thing that we're trying to do is the town hall meeting. We have called for volunteers from the various institutions. Right now, we now have about 16 institutions in Zaria that we have identified to be part of the community network. And we've had about 10 volunteers from each of those institutions. Mr. Shaibu and Dr. Adewale Adedokun are the people that are trying to help us in trying to recruit volunteers from various institutions. We are primarily looking for those volunteers from within Zaria, at least to make them have a sense of ownership of the project. So that's the reason why we are more centered towards recruiting volunteers from Zaria, especially for this town hall meeting. Now, the town hall meeting is supposed to be where we're going to discuss and tell people what the project is all about, what we intend to do, what they are supposed to benefit from it, what we expect from them, and what we're going to do to them. And we believe by doing so, it will give them the sense of ownership that we were looking for. And we hope to be able to do that from the second week of April. Now, you'll be surprised, we had this Beyond the Net grant, and the last quarter of last year, we had wanted to do this town hall meeting earlier this year, but of course, so many disruptions, the elections and the uncertainties and what have you, we had to be postponing it until we are now sure at least elections are over, and we know that we can confidently say we are going to hold the town hall meeting in the second week of April. And after this town hall meeting, we hope to have groups of people that are going to participate in the survey of the various sites. We know there's a fiber, like it was rightly mentioned by Dr. Adewale, there are fiber connectivity going around Zaria from ABU, and they have gracefully donated some strands of dark fiber that we're going to use for institutions that are along the fiber lines. Those ones that are not along the fiber lines, we hope to use wireless, and I'm very sure Mr. Dele Amire will be willing to help us in that aspect. Then after we've done the site survey, then we're going to bring out the network design. That will be coming up hopefully in the first week of May. We should be able to bring out network design. Then to be followed by equipment purchase, the network implementation and testing. We hope to conclude this project by the 4th week of June, all things being equal. So this is the update that we have on the Zaria CN. Even though our solicitation for volunteers actually centered around Zaria, that doesn't mean that we cannot have volunteers outside Zaria. We can have volunteers that we want to contribute either by giving us suggestions or helping us do things that can be done off site. So we are still welcoming all forms of volunteers from all other angles beyond Zaria as well. So that's that about the update on the Zaria CN. And one of the things I was supposed to also do is to do a vote of thanks. We wish to, ISOC Nigeria wish to express our sincere gratitude to all panelists. Michuki, Mwangi, your presentation was very excellent. That is evident by the comments that we've been receiving over on the chat, and you've been attending to some of the comments. So, and we also have Carlos Ray from South Africa. We wish to thank you very well for sparing out of the very tight and busy schedules to be able to come over and present this to us, and we really appreciate it very well. My boss, Dele Amire, we thank you very well. Josephine, Miliza, the only lady in the group, and I must say I'm very, very happy to have a lady in our midst. I mean, it actually balances the gender initiative here, because without you there, it's going to be a more all-male affair. So we really thank you for coming here to give us an insight as your experience in running community network in your native Zimbabwe. Thank you very much. Dr. Adewale Adedokun.
Thank you so much, Tata. Now I want to send the apologies from Gbenga Sheson for not being able to join us in this meeting. He's currently in another event and he has been active in it since morning. I will be there till 5 p.m. So that's why he hasn't been able to join us in this meeting. Also, before we leave, Josephine, I don't know if you have any advice for us concerning the Zaria Community Network that is ongoing. Hello, Josephine.
Hello, yes, I can hear you. I think for me, it's to be more engaged on one-on-one basis, just to understand more about what, especially who the community that will be benefiting from the network, and see what sort of support I can provide on one-on-one basis here. Hello?
Hello, hello.
Thank you very much, Josephine.
Dewole, please go ahead.
Well, I was just saying thank you to Josephine for her offer of support and her advice.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you all for attending. Of course, the discussions continue on Telegram and on ISOC Connect. So please join us there and let's continue the discussions there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much and bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for your 100 minutes and your several megabytes of data and the time for attending this webinar. The recording will be uploaded and posted on the website later today. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
How many megabytes do you want to do? 20 megabytes. Yeah, I'm going to use a mega now.